What's extraordinary about our work, in my mind, is that there's really nothing new about it, and sometimes I wonder what's really innovative about what we do. But I think what appeals to folks and why we get invited to events like this is because inherent in our work, in providing the highest level of education one can find in the United States in places like American prisons, is that it suggests that problems that we think of as intractable, as impossible, are actually really very easy to overcome sometimes if we approach them slightly differently. And when we think of sort of social problems, I also want to emphasize, we'll get back to this theme of impossibility, and I also want to, when we're thinking of social problems, suggest that we always try not to make things less bad, but actively make them better. And sometimes when we see crises that need to be addressed in an urgent way, that's counterintuitive. The work we do is sometimes difficult to describe concisely, immediately, because it all happens at the confluence of two enormous social crises in American life. The first is something that we've come to call mass incarceration. The fact that we in the United States now invest more money than any society, not in the world, but in the history of the world, in confinement. It's an enormous, expensive social experiment without any precedent in human history. And if you're roughly my age or so, and this has been happening over the course of your entire lifetime, what you know is that we as a society have been incarcerating more and more people for longer and longer periods of time, younger and younger ages, very often for smaller and smaller infractions of the law. And we also know extremely well that who we send to prison is in no ways neutral, right? It's tragic that it's almost implicit in our imaginations. It almost doesn't need to be said. The social scientists have looked at the problem geographically and found that there are single blocks in this town, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Los Angeles, major urban areas around the country, where we invest over $1 million a year incarcerating just residents of that given block, right? So mass incarceration for the social scientists is a technical term. It's not just that the problem is so vast, which it is. It's not that it's so expensive, which it also is. It's that the problem is enormously socially concentrated in certain pockets of society in absolutely staggering volume, right? And people who look at crime and punishment and this kind of thing have all kinds of theories, and they disagree bitterly on how we ended up here. But I think all of us know in our hearts that in some way this problem follows, in one way or another, from the relative success and failures of the civil rights revolution of a generation ago. So we have mass incarceration on the one hand, and on the other, we have something we read about even more, which is just the problems we have in education in the United States. Who gets it, how much it costs, how people succeed or fail at it. And again, if you're my age or younger, you've only heard bad news when it comes to education, right? You have bubble tests, arguments about metal detectors in schools, right? And more recently, as people have made an effort to diversify the kinds of education we provide to public school students, you've had, what's become called the war on teachers, right? And education is such an enormously divisive topic. But it's hard to get around the idea that the way we talk about education and the way we've addressed criminal punishment or the problems of violence and crime in the United States are not somehow inherently related, in that both of them suggest that we have adopted an extraordinary cynicism about young people. Unlike ourselves, the young people of today are not to be invested in, and they are to be feared, right? And we, in fact, have all the money, the many billions of dollars that we invest at the local and the state and the federal level in punishment, all of that money it's been paid for by a divestment in education, particularly higher education. Okay? So that's a little bit of the context in which we work. I would say, to get back to this question of how we don't focus on a social problem like crime or punishment or violence and think of how to make it less bad, but how we make it better. So I was an undergraduate at Bard College 15 or 20 years ago and recognized that this was happening in some way, again, what we now call mass incarceration, and did a little research and found there was something, again, not especially innovative and certainly not new, that the college could do that would have vast national impact and also be right at the core, right at the center of what we understand the mission of the college to be. And that is simply to provide incarcerated Americans, women and men, with precisely the same kind of education. A full, broad education that we provide to students on campus to incarcerated New Yorkers. So we've been at it for 15 years. We started with no money. We started with just, pilot 15 students and have grown. We enroll over 300 students now across New York, full-time in academic programs that culminate in associate and bachelor's degrees. Students focus on the full breadth of liberal study, from the arts, the studio arts, literature, all of the humanities, natural sciences. The last bachelor's degree graduation we had, 1/2 of those graduates concentrated in mathematics, studying math at the same level as students on Bard's campus who come from, Eastern Europe and China and the fanciest high schools in this town and Los Angeles and all across the United States. They study foreign languages, Mandarin, German, French, Spanish, etc., right? Accomplishing things that the leaders in education think are in some way impossible for them because we hold standards so low for certain kinds of people, and also the results of which in criminal justice are also impossible, right? Nationally, people argue about the numbers, but nationally, virtually everyone who goes to prison, leaves to prison, tends to come back, right? Which is what we call recidivism. Those rates are somewhere between 40, 60, and 70% nationally speaking. For people who are in prison who go to Bard, those rates are roughly somewhere between 2 and 4%. Those are results that, for the experts in crime prevention, for the experts in criminal justice, are simply impossible. But again, I think we should point to how we do college admission, how we as leaders in higher education look at the American landscape, how we think we're going to train this generation of Americans for the challenges we face in the 21st century. Can anyone in this room find anyone who's optimistic about how we face those challenges as a country, right? And I think we need to look at the people who make these decisions in education and say, how do we engage a radically broader swath of the American populace in the kinds of programs that really change expectations and change people's lives? We're going to show a very short piece of propaganda for you. It's a scene from a college graduation that we had just about 2 years ago. These are all men who are completing associate's degrees from Bard, virtually all of which have since been released.
When the BPI program first started at Eastern, approximately 15 years ago, I was there. And I remember some of my friends getting accepted into BPI. I used to see how happy they were to be a part of something meaningful.
It changed the whole scope of my incarceration from wasting countless hours a day, doing things I shouldn't have been doing, to giving me something to focus on and concentrate on and put my all into.
It really hit me that I had to do something, not just so I don't repeat the same mistakes, but so I could contribute to my family, first and foremost, my family, and my community. because I think those are the people who really need it most, especially since I've been a contributor for the negative effects of our society.
What if the solution was the person we thought was the problem? I want each of you to think about the moment you decided to stop sliding, to stop failing, stop moving sideways, and to rise. You've overcome significant hardships. Some weren't your fault, some were. But the measure of your achievement is the distance that you've traveled since then.
My time with Bard has definitely shown me that I am an intellectual. I like scholarly work, I love it, I get enthused by it. I get lost in a new book every time I take it back to my cell and read it, and I look forward to just the pursuit of education and the acquisition of knowledge in itself.
I was released November 15th of last year. Bard College actually helped me transition into CUNY very easily, and I'm on the fast track to get my bachelor's by the spring of next year.
I'm really proud. Yeah.
This is an investment that the entire nation should be making. These guys are going to be problem solvers, and they're going to go back to places where problems abound. The notion that they have a sense of what to do and how to do it, I think bodes well for the future. At my age, for the first time in a lot of years, I consider myself to be an optimist, based entirely on what's happened to me here.
Others will tell you how significant our program is, and there's an emphasis in how much we do for you. You ought to know that you do a lot for us. We live at a time where people don't really believe in education. That doubt is something we struggle with. Your enthusiasm, your determination, your idealism about education gives back to us a reminder of why we should fight for what we do.
When I saw my family and I saw the tears and the excitement in their eyes and the words of inspiration that they were giving me, it was like, that's when it really hit me. That's when I just couldn't hold back anymore. There was just tears coming down my cheeks. And it was a really amazing experience. And I've actually never before I've cried any tears of joy like that before. And they actually made it possible today. Yeah.
I believe we don't have a single person to waste in this country. And when you look in the mirror, if you still see a person who's the problem, then consider what if the person we thought is the problem is actually the solution? What if the solution is you?
I always wondered what it would feel like to be the best in this world. Well, some of the best in this world are here today, and they're my fellow graduates. Some people refer to us as inmates, prisoners, con men, but we are more than these labels suggest. This education, this degree, it symbolizes excellence. Excellence that's birth out of struggle. My struggle, all of our struggles.
So what's important to remember as you look at that film, it's, I think, a piece that makes a person feel optimistic, but it should also be something that makes, that's upsetting. And it's essential to recognize that everyone you've seen in that movie that's receiving their degree are precisely the same adults who, as young people, 15 or 20 years ago, described as super predators, right? They're not analogous to those people. They're not kind of like those people. They are precisely those people. And today, we have alumni who are going back to the communities from which they came, working with so-called youth at risk and people with HIV and AIDS and the homeless. We have a whole cadre of Bard alum, formerly incarcerated Bard alumni, working with kids who've dropped out of school in the roughest neighborhoods in Brooklyn, helping them pass the high school equivalency exam, working in public health, and addressing the most difficult social problems that exist in places like New York City. History can help lead the way for us, right? If we care about the future and care about engaging students, we in some way bear the burden of finding people with this kind of capacity and this kind of curiosity. And we know in the American past, there have always been groups of people who take better kinds of advantage of educational access than others. We think of immigrants forever, throughout American history, have always taken better advantage of this kind of opportunity than the rest of us, right? There's no question that throughout the 20th century, veterans returning home from foreign wars transformed the landscape of American higher education. We know that 80 years ago, the best colleges were not the fanciest institutions, but were community colleges in Brooklyn and Queens that were filled with people who were barred from those institutions, right? Children of immigrants themselves. And we never, ever talk about it, but no group of people in American history accomplished more in education, from the remedial to the highest levels, than the generation or two who left slavery behind and were emancipated in the South. So there have always been people who associate in American life the relationship between education and American freedom. And there's no question to us that in today's America, in today's United States, that incarcerated Americans are analogous to those other groups. And so the question becomes, how do you do this in a way where you get results that seem almost impossibly good? And I think we believe that the first thing to do is to make no assumptions about what someone is interested in or what they're capable of. Never start from a focus on some kind of deficiency. We never look, when we do admission, at the nature of someone's criminal conviction or institutional record or the length of their sentence. Everyone comes to us as a college student, right? And we go from there. And as you've seen, people do extraordinarily well. In the realm of, I think, criminal justice, we are starting to finally address this incredible overinvestment in punishment and in prisons, but we're doing so, in our view, in a cynical way, in a way which very gradually decreases that investment and decreases the number of people we have in prison, which is certainly the right thing to do, but does not imagine how we can have a radically better future, right? Mass incarceration, in our view, is a symptom, but not a disease. You know, if you look again at the American past and how we've addressed our worst social problems, I think there's some guidance, right? If you were a radical abolitionist in the 1850s and someone told you in 10 years slavery would be gone from the American South, that was an impossibly good outcome. You would be absolutely overjoyed. But if that same person told you that 30 or 40 years later, labor conditions in the South would really not be all that different, you would not really know how to contend with that. And if you were, a government official building the New Deal in the 1930s in response to the Great Depression, and someone told you that you would have a level of success such that you would build a larger and more prosperous middle class than the world had ever seen in history, again, you would be overjoyed. But you would have no idea that you were building institutional and lasting systems of segregation and racial hierarchy throughout the United States that would last longer than the prosperousness of that middle class. That's also true. And if you were a freedom rider in 1965 or 1964, and anyone could ever somehow convey to you the level of your courage and your victory that you'd experience over the next number of years, you would be reduced to tears. But then if that same person told you that 50 years later, in our America today, there are more African American men without the right to vote than there were before the Civil Rights Bills, how would you respond? I think we have the right to have confidence that we will overcome this crisis of mass incarceration, but we have to know that what comes next will not necessarily be better, and the way to make sure that what we provide our children is better is by investing in people, in my opinion, in precisely this kind of way. In the Jewish tradition, we call learning a form of prayer, right? And about a year or so ago, I was lucky. I spent quite a lot of time with the Cardinal of New York City. The Archdiocese has been very supportive of us. And Cardinal Dolan said something extraordinary. He said, the Church classically believes that God continues his creation through education, right? A fundamental Christian belief in an individual's ability to change over time and improve themselves, irrespective of the chaos or violence around that person in the outside world. Our contention and our plea to the United States is that we take the same sense of optimism and the same determination to focus on transformation to our institutions, to our prisons and our schools and our government, as Cardinal Dolan does and suggests individuals do. I'm very just proud to say that one of the reasons we're here this week, we not only have our program in New York State enrolling around 300 students, but are very busy recruiting, training, sometimes bribing other first-rate schools to get into this business. And just this season are opening up an office in Chicago. We are in 12 states across the country, and we are in most of the states of the Midwest, and are very optimistic, again, that we can do much better on each of these issues in criminal justice and certainly in education if we believe in individuals in this kind of way and look forward to doing this work in this town in the years to come. So thank you very much.